Good evening and welcome to our July work session here at the Borough of Gettysburg. An executive session of the Borough Council will be conducted immediately following the adjournment of this evening's work session, consistent with Section 708A2 and Section 708A5 of the Sunshine Act for the following purposes. 1, to provide an informational update and review related to the negotiation of a new collective bargaining agreement with the International Brotherhood of the Teamsters, Local number 776, on behalf of the Gettysburg Borough Nonuniformed Employees Labor Organization. And 2, to review and discuss matters of borough business which, if conducted in public, could lead to the disclosure of information or matters of confidentiality protected by law. So, before we start public comment, you'll note the agenda here includes fire code revisions, discussion of domestic poultry, fire department recruitment and retention, and the Sign Ordinance. So, with that, anyone for public comment related to items on the agenda? Okay, if not, I invite Mr. Millers, if you want to come and maybe, or you could say where you are, I guess. I'm trying to think of where the microphone will be best.
This mic for community media purposes.
The podium?
Yeah.
I do, but if you need me, I can speak up well enough to be heard.
Okay, all right, Clem. So we've asked Mr. Malat to join us this evening. The fire code here in the borough could be a bit more robust. We have some identified issues that we could deal with involving interconnection of alarm systems, ensuring smoke detectors are required in occupancies that are in the same structure as dwelling units. So if you have a shop on the first floor and people live above, there should be smoke detectors there, and considering automatic fire sprinklers for new construction. So, Mr. Malat, if you can help us with some ideas of how we could approach this.
Good evening. Short of adopting the International Fire Code in its entirety, my recommendation would be to craft an ordinance to address your specific needs. The Uniform Construction Code covers a lot of the borough's needs for new construction, remodeling, change of occupancy. But as far as the International Fire Code goes, it only applies to the extent that it's referenced in the International Building Code. So things like fire suppression systems, life safety issues in existing buildings would be addressed, but they only come under the jurisdiction of the borough when there's a change. And what I hear council probably has an interest in is a more robust fire prevention program, as you mentioned, with the alarm systems and the smoke detectors. And I feel that can probably best be addressed by a local ordinance, something that's specific that requires or maybe modification to an existing ordinance, such as your regulated rental ordinance, when it comes to commercial detection in a building that has residential occupancies above or attached to it.
Yeah, we do have a very basic fire prevention and protection ordinance that basically mandates smoke detectors in buildings and things of that nature. And then, of course, the UCC, pardon me, the RRU, the regulated rental units require quite a bit more. One thing I think it would be helpful for the council to know is when we talk about things like automatic fire sprinklers, can you explain, just for everyone's benefit, how that falls in with code and how Pennsylvania is different than many other areas in terms of opting out of sprinkler requirements?
When we speak about fire suppression or sprinklers, if you will, a lot of times we only think about them in commercial structures, large buildings, multi-story buildings, warehouses, things like that. But the international building codes, which are adopted by the Uniform Construction Code, cover any built item. And then the code itself examines that built item or structure and determines if and when fire suppression is required within that. And that's based on building size, the type of occupancy, any hazardous materials or human life that might be held or housed within that building. Pennsylvania, I think in 2009, between 2006 and 2009, the international codes changed to require sprinklers in residential settings, including 1- and 2-family dwellings. And at the adoption of the 2009 code, the state legislature provided a statutory change which eliminated the need or the requirement for fire suppression in single-family homes and duplexes. Anything beyond that, anything that's not a single-family home or duplex, it's still examined under the International Building Code, Chapter 9, to determine whether whether or when a fire suppression system is required. But throughout Pennsylvania, not just the Borough of Gettysburg, we no longer look at no longer allowed to look at a requirement for fire suppression in single-family homes or duplexes unless the municipality has a standalone ordinance that requires that. To get that standalone ordinance approved, it has to be, of course, created by the municipality and then forwarded to the Department of Labor and Industry for their review and approval. I've been through something similar once with the department, only in the extent that the municipality adopted the International Fire Code in its entirety, but that still did not trigger the allowance for the municipality to enforce fire suppression in single-family homes and duplexes.
Okay.
But again, that only affects single-family homes and duplexes. Anything else that's built in the borough is regulated under the International Building Code, and whether it's an existing building or it's a new building, if there's any change or if it's being built, the code has specific thresholds or requirements that they have to meet in order to trigger that fire suppression requirement.
Okay. Yes, I remember distinctly. It's not in the borough, but there was a hotel built in the area of Evergreen Cemetery, and I remember it being built in very modern times without fire suppression.
And it
really
would
surprised by that.
I didn't mean to interrupt there, but it would have been built under the Fire and Panic Act of 1927,
Okay.
which carried significantly different, although somewhat similar at times, life safety requirements.
Are there any other recommendations that you gentlemen have for things that we should consider?
I'm sure it's in that it may not have to go in front of the Department of Labor, but may enhance the fire protection that you have in the borough. Like you mentioned very early on, the requirement for smoke or fire detection in the commercial space that's adjacent to or below a residential use occupancy.
Well, if I may, from my experience doing the property maintenance inspections, I think once they enter that responsibility, the whole building should fall under periodic maintenance, periodic inspections. If they have residential on the top floors and retail on the first floor, that retail should be inspected at the same time the residential is.
I would agree with that as well. It's a life safety issue that right now the people that would be doing the inspection don't necessarily have access to all areas and all spaces within that building.
This is kind of a first look, but you know, so we'll have a few months to discuss this. Questions from the council?
So the proposals that are here in the PBS, the interconnected alarm system, the smoke detection, and the sprinklers, this would only be on commercial spaces or new builds, or could this be retroactively applied to other structures?
There's usually a standard for
If
certain percentage of
yeah,
remodel,
if they're
or
gonna fall under whatever percentage that you've established, if it's renovated, and it's in that percentage. So if you say 2,000 square feet, if I'm renovating 2,000 square feet, it's gonna have the sprinklers installed.
that's usually kind of how that type of change can occur. The other thing Mr. Mott discussed was like change of occupancy, and that's, you want to be careful about that because a lot of this we're looking at is some of the things like automatic fire sprinklers, right? You have pretty much a built environment. The effort is that, like, if you're going to add to the built environment, that you add to it in the safest way possible. When you're looking at the existing buildings, it's more about adaptation and how do you make sure they're as safe as reasonable. Adding sprinklers, for instance, to a new construction building is a lot simpler, right, than adding it to old construction. The interconnected alarm systems have really changed a lot in the past several years. that used to require drilling, and you'd have to run wire and so forth. And now a lot of them work via Bluetooth or some other similar technology. And kind of the two paths here were either look at some itemized changes or to adopt the International Fire Code, and adopting the International Fire Code could be difficult for us to actually administer in terms of the cost of it and so forth. That's a thing to consider.
And just for clarity, when you say interconnected, we're talking about, so if a smoke detector goes off in one apartment, it alerts people in other apartments. You're not talking about a system that notifies the fire department necessarily.
Not necessarily. I don't know how that's.
I believe right now it requires all the detectors within that particular area must go off. Corridor smoke detectors have to go off throughout the entire building.
Yeah, I mean, you could require
Only corridors?
a dial.
And the
but-
corridors or public areas, they have to go off in the entire building. But I can burn the toast in my apartment, and I'm not setting off smoke detectors in the whole building.
Sure.
And that was kind of how this. We went out a morning in September of 2020 and found out that we almost, burnt down a quarter of the square because there was a small fire that just by the way the chair was constructed basically smoldered itself out because it reached hardwood as opposed to the foam, and its fuel got more difficult to burn. And the person was sitting in the chair, was sleeping, actually was slightly burned. But had it what it struck me when we got there, it was like 4 or 5 in the morning, was that the smoke detector immediately above the person's head went off. No one else in the entire building woke up. And this was like a second floor apartment that faces the square. The building's on Chambersburg Street, 3 Chambersburg Street. So there's a story full of apartments above, there's apartments adjacent. No one else was roused at all. And to be fair, when you stood in the hallway with the door closed, you could hear it, but it wasn't so loud that you would necessarily be woken up. So that occurred to me, and I know folks had mentioned me before, people had mentioned me over the last several years about the issue of not having any detection ability in some of these first floors, where downtown in particular, right, we have a lot of first floor shops, second, third floor apartments. If you have a restaurant or something like that, things are required. If you have kind of your normal mercantile, nothing else going on, not necessarily. So there just seem to be some gaps, and it's not the only time. There have been some other times where it's just kind of surprising. The stuff you find is surprising. But to require it to report would be another thing you could require. I can tell you we have some now that they're literally new owners bought the building, and they'll cut the phone lines and so forth sometimes. And a few years ago it was voted on to allow the representatives or agents of the regulated rentals to live up to 50 miles away, and that has been problematic. Just reaching people sometimes. I called Clem. It's been a few months, but we were in a building and we couldn't get the alarm fixed. It's not really our job to fix the alarm, but we couldn't get it to resolve. We couldn't reach anyone responsible for the building. The occupant, business occupant, it's not really their responsibility for the alarm. It's the owner of the structure, and they couldn't be reached. And it took an incredible amount of effort to get a hold of them. And then PMCA followed up and got things squared away. But it's challenging. So this is something with, like I say, the staff, with Carly and Pete, and kind of look at how this might impact what you guys do, how it might impact permitting. It's just something to start thinking about here over the next few months as we start to look at this.
I think I would look for guidance on whether you're looking to have some of these which changes you're looking to have applied just to new construction or construction over so many feet, and which changes you're looking to apply to existing
Right.
buildings and or regulated rentals. Cause that would kind of help us figure out what ordinance and what place to put.
Yeah, from my standpoint, I think the big division is the automatic fire sprinklers. That's a new construction or over.
The general rule, it's not fair to make somebody come in and retrofit a building they're not doing anything with.
Yeah.
But if they go to renovations or alterations, much like accessibility, put a percentage on it. They have to put 20% of the cost of the renovations into accessibility. Maybe do the same thing with this. Put 20 or 30% of the renovations into fire suppression, fire detection.
It's something that can be done, but there's great expense in it. Sometimes there are great motivations. The college retrofitted everything after Seton Hall had their fatal fire many, many years ago. And there was just a moment, and they said no one will, after such a date, the trustees said there will be a date, and no one will sleep in a non-sprinklered area after that date. That caused a lot of changes there. Now, again, downtown, you know, not everybody's going to have those resources, and at the same time, not everybody's going to have the same motivations either. Right? You're talking about lots of people under a roof in close quarters. So. Comments, positives, negatives, think we should pursue this, think we should not pursue it.
Well, I think we should. I think we should. We like you commonly call it a built environment. It's a close quarters environment too. The potential for loss of life is very high.
Jake, we're still here. He lost a building almost twice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about
Yeah.
to say, and it's not just one building. It depending upon, it could be, as you just mentioned earlier, it could be an entire quad of the square. I agree that there's expense involved, but I would say, for sure, if it is brand new construction, that should be an automatic given. You need to, if it's brand new construction. If it's renovation, I agree with the gentleman, a percentage. If it's a certain amount of renovation of the building, a percentage should be for accessibility, and a percentage should be for safety, for preventing fires.
Do we require like suppression ANSEL systems in commercial kitchens?
Yes, we do, particularly if there's a type 1 cooking hood or, grease-laden environment. And also, to this gentleman's comment, the current version of the International Codes is 2018 that we're following, and they do have thresholds which require mandatory fire suppression in, again, everything but what's been statutorily exempted here in Pennsylvania is 1 and 2 family dwellings. Everything else, there's a threshold. If you do this to this extent, then fire suppression is going to be required. Beyond that, the restaurants are determined not only by what they prepare in the kitchen or the equipment that they have, but also the occupant load of the seating environment.
Well, it seems like if we're going to follow that guideline and we can compel compliance there, then we should be able to do it elsewhere as well.
Yeah, I think the one thing, just be aware, I'm going to be relying on Mr. Mellors and folks quite a lot. There could be some expense with that because I know that people are familiar. I'm involved with the fire department, but I'm not trained as a fire inspector or with really codes.
Sure.
I observe things. Clem gets emails occasionally. Pete gets email pictures sometimes. Look at this. This might not be illegal, but darn, it seems like it should be. You open up a door and there's the back side of a drywall. That's like the only way inside out the interior of the building. And the one we did find was a renovation. The electrical was just hanging, electrical feed just hanging kind of.
That was repaired.
Yeah, not really well suspended underneath. I was like, that's interesting. I also found out there were residential units back there in the alley off of Middle Street. That was an interesting discovery. I did not know that. All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We'll be
Thank
in
you.
touch. Domestic poultry, Mr. Moon.
All right, thanks. Hey everybody, I'm still compiling materials. I hope everybody got a chance to review what I did put in the folder. So the origin of this, quite simply, when I first moved here from the big city, I thought, wouldn't it be cool to have chickens? And immediately found out that we could not. And in the time that we've been here, I've been approached by, I could say literally dozens of people who've all asked me, why can't I have chickens? I heard from one woman who lives over in the first ward. She said, well, I talked to Wes Heyser, and Wes said, well, code enforcement is weak. This was a few years ago. So, but we don't really want to encourage people to do things that would be
Is this like my neighbor across the street?
I'll tell you later. Counterindicated.
Somebody that was having some. Okay.
So there's lots of reasons when people might want to do this. First of all, producing food in your own home or on your own property is appealing to many people. Chickens and other small poultry like quail can be excellent sources of protein, and I think it's possible to consider that as a community with such a high level of folks who are considered low income, that anything that you can do to help somebody's budget should be considered a plus. Additionally, chickens are excellent at eradicating insect populations, mosquitoes and ticks. They're beneficial to your yard. They make fertilizer all day, every day. And I think there's some very straightforward limitations that could be placed on ownership of chickens, capping the number of birds, minimum lot size requirements. There are recommendations for minimum space per bird for coops, as well as minimum space per bird for runs. We can mandate that runs are covered to protect them from other predators. And we could just very simply say no roosters, since they tend to be the noisier ones. There are breeds of chicken that are quieter than others. Quail are also very quiet. And I think we should also specify that keeping birds for any purpose other than how do I word that? Keeping birds for fighting would be prohibited by law. So I would put that. So I think it's a fun idea, but I realize that other people might not. Obviously, there are concerns, some of the same concerns we have with other issues: noise, environmental impact, disposal of feces, disposal of birds should they die on you. You don't know what to do with them. Dealing with stray animals. We don't really have a good animal apprehension system. So I'm curious to hear what other people's thoughts on it might be.
Have a lot of thoughts.
Yes.
Okay.
I called Commissioner Qualley and told him that we would be discussing this tonight and asked if he provide me with some information, because I knew nothing about the issue of avian flu, for example, in Adams County. And he put me in touch with someone at Penn State Extension named Donna Shira, and she was just a wealth of information, really interesting information, and several links which I have forwarded via email to you all, just how to how to manufacture appropriate legislation for this type of thing. Okay, she tells me that migratory birds are the big villains in this in carrying the avian flu. And so when you mention to be protective of
I'm sorry, Mrs. Butterfield, could you speak up just a little bit louder? I'm interested to hear what you have to say.
I sure will. I'll do my best.
Thank you.
Oh, and here they're adjusting my mic. Good. migratory birds are the issue, and therefore it would have to be protected from the migratory birds who are attracted by the feed that the chickens are receiving. So in order to prevent the spread of this disease into our backyard flocks, which they're referred to in several pieces of legislation, then that would have to be as well. She believes that if we do allow it and we're crafting the ordinance, that we should be very specific that they have a biosecurity plan. And one of the links that I found is what is such a plan, and it involves things like how, if you have chickens in your backyard, how to dress when you go to Tractor Supply to buy the feed. Who knew? You would need to wear protective clothing so you weren't spreading it there. She says that in Gettysburg, rats will be a real problem, and other vermin, as we have discussed in recent times, that this will be a real problem, and so any coop type that we require has to adjust to that type of thinking as well. Protecting the chickens, protecting us from the chickens getting the virus, and protecting the whole shebang from rodents and other vermin. No roosters, as you mentioned, but here's a wrinkle in that. Tractor Supply, up until last week, was selling chicks. They were, and I learned this today, straight run chicks. And that means you don't know if they're going to grow up to be a rooster or a hen.
That's right.
And so you buy a dozen chicks and you get home, and chances are you're going to end up, quite innocently, with 5 or so roosters. You just don't know. Now, Tractor Supply does also sell chicks that have been identified, but they're much more expensive. And so people prefer to buy the straight run chicks. So she suggested that we look at our wording, that do we want to require that they know, or do we want them just to take on and gamble? A problem with suddenly they're turning into roosters. By that time, she said, and she used to be a backyard chicken farmer down in Frederick, where there are many, apparently. And she said, by the time they show you whether they're a rooster or a hen, you have become attached to them. You probably have named them. You may even be holding them on your lap occasionally. And so no one wants to eat them or dispose of them that way. So suddenly it's a burden on the SPCA. And they're taking in all these pet chickens that are hard to put up for adoption. She said a lot of legislation in Maryland limits 5 birds to a backyard flock. She said there can be no less than 2. I guess chickens get lonely. I don't know why there can be no less than 2. They need 5 square feet per bird. You could have it go up to 10 if it's a large bird. As I said, the SPCA was overwhelmed. In 2 years, these chicks stop laying, and then the owner has to decide what to do with the adult chickens that are no longer laying eggs, which was usually the reason they took them in the first place. And that's when the SPCA steps in and has a real problem. They have a trainer who will come and train us on how to keep backyard flocks, and she recommends that we put that in the ordinance, that they must take such training of how to keep a backyard flock. A quail is a game bird and requires much more area than a chicken. So we can't just blanket say the coop has to be this big. And you'll be happy to hear I'm coming to the end of my remarks with just one more fact. Chickens are messy eaters, and they spread their feet around, and that increases the chance of there being lots more vermin. fascinating information, I think. And I appreciated and thanked her profusely.
Very cool.
And Mrs. Butterfield's comments, which are very informative, you didn't even get into the issue of what happens with predators. Does this mean that you get foxes then that start to prowl around neighborhoods in the borough because of chickens?
Coyotes.
Yeah, I think there's a lot more. I don't know. We have a lot of zoning issues and other ordinances that we're dealing with. The introduction of livestock into the borough is not something that's high on my list.
It's definitely an interesting concept. I agree. I think I have to agree with Miss Lawson, though. There's plenty of, in my opinion, there's plenty of farming area and outside of the borough, and certainly within the other parts of Adams County, for this, for backyard chickens. I'm happy to continue to hear various opinions on it, and even talk to residents about it. But I think we've got a lot of other things on our list. I'm not sure that that's something that would be at the top of mind right now.
We were just talking about fire alarms and suppression, and how the borough is kind of closely built in a lot of places, and we're only about a mile and a half one way, a mile and a half the other, and I just don't see it. I'm not keen on the idea. You would need many feet away from another property. I think for every one person that thinks it's a cool idea, there's probably 50 or 100 that probably don't.
So, to speak to that real quick, and sorry to interrupt, Carly and I did talk about how we would have to require certain setbacks, both from the primary domicile as well as from neighboring any building that was inhabited. We talked about minimum lot widths, and so I mean it is possible to allow it while still being cognizant
Take
of
your
the fact-
yard, for example.
Sure.
Would that work?
Yeah.
Okay. How would your neighbors, do you think?
Well, we could also, have a thing in there where neighbors have a chance to, say, this is a terrible idea in our neighborhood, right? So, and there may be neighborhoods where it's not appropriate, but others where it is. The number we came up with based on other ordinances was 30 feet from inhabited buildings. One issue that was specifically called out was a woman in a different municipality who didn't care that her neighbors had birds, but she had an allergy, and the coop was so close to the intake for her HVAC that it was exacerbating her allergies. And so in that case, I don't know if they were able to locate it further away, but that certainly is a requirement we could put in as well.
I just think Adams County's great. I know people that have chickens, but I mean, they're all out in the country.
Sure.
I'm just not keen on the idea, the feces and, just the smell. You say, well, we just have hens and the clucking, and then you have to have people, looking into compliance and all that. And we just have, for me, just so many other things.
Something
on our
funny
plate.
about that, if you all looked at the ordinance that Matt provided, the sample ordinance, in there it says you'll have one chicken clucking at a time. Those aren't the exact words, but so I could see the owner gathering around. So girls, now you're going to have to only cluck once at a time. How would that be controlled? So we have to be careful not to ordinance ourselves into something that's impossible.
I hate to open this can of worms or this carton of eggs, but do we currently have an ordinance that says that someone can't?
We do.
Yes.
Do we currently have an ordinance that says what kind of pet someone can't have?
We do.
Okay.
We have ordinance that prohibits certain animals. It also specifically says you cannot keep poultry.
Okay.
And one of the things that Carly also pointed out while we were digging into this is that it's a section of the ordinance that needs some updating as well. For example, there's language in there that's very specific on how to deal with stray animals. And because it was written at a time where, you know, summary execution was the only tool in the toolbox, that's pretty much what it calls for. Whereas we might want to address that differently in this day and age, to work with, you know, humane organizations.
It was 2008 that ordinance came in. Harry, do you remember
It was
that?
definitely revised, yeah.
Yes, revised in 2008,
Right.
and it was driven by a non-poultry issue. It was driven by, Sarah, do you remember, was it a goat or a pig?
It was the pigs, because I
pig,
think
I
that was
thought it
when
was,
those, everybody was getting one of those little pet pigs for their house, so that was the issue.
Now, the original ordinances were to prohibit were from 1935 and 1936. So there was a bit of age
Yeah.
in that, but we didn't make any, we certainly didn't make any changes in that regard in the update. That's.
Yeah, and I think we even saw that the ordinance currently sort of requires police to shoot stray dogs. Like, it says they don't have to, but maybe they should. There's some wording there that could use some updating.
Doesn't include the word like rabbit or something.
No.
May
checking.
humanely kill, I believe.
Checking.
Well, it says may, but then it also says and will.
Right.
Like, I don't know. I don't know that I necessarily would want to compel a police officer to kill an animal if it was not their desire.
Okay. Well, it is very specific, as I noticed the ordinance calls out beekeeping too.
Yeah.
A lot of things you can't do in the borough. No homing pigeons.
What I mean, it talks about pigeons. I don't know if they're
I'm
homing
pretty sure it
specifically.
says homing.
Homing?
Pigeons. I think it does, which kind of reflects the era. No?
It says
Okay.
Pigeons are also
Including
included
homing
under-
and racing pigeons.
Including homing. Okay.
But they're also included under poultry, and so since there's a ban on poultry.
It's like, I think it's been a while since
there's an across-the-board
racing
ban on
pigeons and homing pigeons were common. Although,
Yeah, pigs must have been the first issue because that was the 1935 ordinance, then all the rest fell into place in 36. So no hogs, then all the remaining animals.
okay, well, I'm kind of getting a sense from at least 3 members of council, Mr. Lawler's absent. This might be something we let go for now
Okay.
and revisit.
I would like to
potentially.
revisit, I would like to revisit some of the wording that's in the ordinance that I just heard about.
Say perhaps we should.
But I don't, but as far as prioritizing, I would like us to prioritize some of our some issues we already have that we've been talking about for several meetings, with regards to cleanliness of our borough, and unwanted things that are happening. You know what I mean? Before we go to this.
Well, I do.
That might cause more of that.
So it's a sort of so that problem is already here. So the issue of the roaches.
Mhm.
Somebody sent a video to Carly last week that showed them kind of swarming on a tree on Chambersburg Street, and I walked it after dark the other night, and I saw the affected block. It is a substantial population
Yeah,
of
something's
roaches.
going on.
And so our exterminator was here in the building this week, and she showed him pictures and asked about them, and it turns out they live in our sewers.
Mhm.
And they come
Come out at
out
night.
this time of year because it's hot in the pipes. And so they've probably been there for forever, and they're going to go right back there as soon as it's not stiflingly hot.
Mhm.
I think he said that they tend not to go into buildings.
He said that the type of cockroach that's in the sewers that was pictured are not they could go into buildings, but he wasn't concerned with them causing an infestation in buildings unless the building had a wet dirt basement. Otherwise, they generally would keep going and seek, a sewer-like environment. They're, I think, Asian cockroaches. They're not the ones that you typically see infesting buildings.
Yeah, and because we can't spray the pipes,
Sure.
we can't spray the sewers, we can't really spray the trees because it would affect other insects as well and probably birds. So unfortunately, we have to live with those little fellas. I believe he said the best tool we have is a stout pair of boots. So.
Okay. Mr. Hale's like, next page. Yep, that's something we're dealing with right now. Fortunately. Large amount of cockroaches. Okay, so it sounds like it's possible we may revisit domestic poultry in the future. I know we have some items coming up here in August. We're kind of expecting to get more into the portable toilet discussion and some of those things that needs to be a bit more prepped for that. So that's something we could look at in the future. The next item on the agenda deals with fire department recruitment and retention. We received a letter here at the borough from the fire department this past week related to a tax credit program, Act 172 of 2016, which was amended either in 2020 or 2021. This is something I've been aware of for quite some time, and it's something I sort of hesitated to bring up. And if we were to pursue this, obviously you need to understand that this is something that I would be recusing myself related to, yet I kind of stand here as a reference to if you want to pursue such a project, perhaps how you may want to do it from the interests of the taxpayer, the interests of the borough. There are communities that have been doing this. This was in place previously, but it capped the amount of tax at 20% that you could essentially forgive or forego from a volunteer firefighter, and that really just did not make sense in terms of the expense of an ordinance and so forth, with the number of people we're talking about. This is, again, it's one of those things where I don't like to bring it up because there's, no matter how you cut this, the way that I'm involved, I'll definitely benefit from it personally. There's just no way around it. But I would be remiss to leave out just the fact that we are not in a good position. We have walked back, I would say, from the edge a little bit in the last few years at the fire department. I gave an interview in 2017 that probably seemed a little bit, some folks probably thought I was exaggerating at the time, but I was not, that we had situations where we had people handling emergencies on their own. It was happening a little bit too much. We're not really seeing that type of circumstance today, but at the same time, we're not really out of the woods either. A few days ago, I don't remember which day it was, but we had 2 calls back to back in the morning, and we had 2 people out for one, which the opportunity is 4, and then the other call that happened right about the same time, we turned 3 out, and that involved me, like, it took us long enough to get out that I was getting my kids ready. I took them to daycare, dropped them off, and went to the firehouse. That was the amount of time it took us to get out.
Jeez.
So it's not as critical as it once was, but we need to really stop the bleeding, and we really need to do some things to address it. We have a very small number of people that we're relying upon, and it's problematic. And recently, probably within the last 6 months, I had at least 2 or 3 of we've been lucky here in the last 5 to 10 years, we've started to see an influx of some younger people And the questions I'm starting to get now from them, or starting to observe, is they're starting to look at buying houses. And they're often looking at buying houses outside the borough because of the tax rate. And we actually had an acting chief of the fire department who is no longer because he relocated for that reason. That was one of his stated reasons. So just to understand how this would function if it did, you have the option to essentially abate the real estate taxes and the earned income taxes. Any taxing authority could do this. Cumberland County just did this for their entire county. A school district, a borough, or a township could do it. In our borough, the average, the median value of an owner-occupied residence means that it would work out to be just around $800 that you'd probably be abating, closer to $900, I guess, $882, and about $210 in earned income taxes. So you're talking about around $1,100 per person per year. So this isn't an insignificant amount of revenue that you're foregoing. In my view, the letter the fire department sent sought this for kind of a broader range of people. When I put this together, I would propose narrowing that really to people that are trained to respond to the emergencies they're responding to and are responding to those emergencies in a capacity of at least 50 a year. The reality is we usually there's very few people that are right around that number. If you look at the 7 people that would qualify for this year, if it had been in place, it comes down to right around, to get the numbers correct here, but it was right around $3.75 per response that you're giving up based upon their response numbers. To me, as a borough, this is worth it if you can forego hiring paid employees. That's what makes this worth it. To me, this is a part of a package, a larger package. A lot of it was really on the fire department to do some things to help get some people in and keep them in. But it's part of a maneuver to try to avoid going to full-time firefighters. If you go to full-time firefighters in the borough, it's probably roughly comparable to hiring a police officer. You're talking about roughly $100,000 per person. If you have a 3-shift schedule, a 3-platoon shift schedule, which is typical, it's either 3 or 4. 3 would be 12 people, 4 would be 16. 12 people that would cost you $1.2 million a year. And do understand that that's really not, it's probably normal for the area. If you compare it to like Hanover or Chambersburg or somewhere like that, I wouldn't really say, if you looked at any type of standards from the National Fire Protection Association or ISO or anyone else, it's not going to be considered sufficient, right? It's going to be well below the minimum recommended. But it gets you one piece of apparatus with the recommended 4 people on it. If you have volunteers that are only taking that bare minimum 50 calls with 700 runs that we have roughly each year at the fire department, it takes you about 56 people to make that. If you forgave the taxes at the estimated rate for those 56 people, you're talking about less than $62,000. So you kind of compare that $62,000 with your $1.2 million, and that's kind of and that's how I look at it. You know, as a member of the fire department, you know, if I were to look at it in that lens, I would say, oh, this is something we should try to give to as many people as possible, encourage membership and so forth. But as I wrote in your PBS, I just have to be conscious that there are a lot of good people doing a lot of good work in the borough. So it's not really appropriate to just say, hey, you're here, that's great. You get on the fire engine, fantastic. Here's your tax rebate. The alternative that I propose is that you require people to be certified to either firefighter 1, which are your interior firefighters, to driver operator pumper, which are your drivers, or to what they call traffic. I keep forgetting how it's phrased. It deals with traffic control. It's traffic emergency response. They use a few different terms for that. TIMS is the common one, Traffic Incident Management System is the common acronym. That certification has been normal in Gettysburg for 20 years. It has been, people have been seeking it out much longer than that. It has been kind of the standard that people receive when they finish their training for the last 10 or so. At a certain point, Adams County started to make that happen at the conclusion of the class. Before that, you would drive to take that test. The closest is usually Harrisburg, but they test in York, they test in Franklin County at different times. When I did it many, many years ago, I drove to Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. And realize these are just the entry level. These are not really what you would look at for supervisory personnel or anything like that. This is like, hey, you're new, but you have demonstrated, and that's a big part of the certification process. It's a written test and then skill stations. You have demonstrated that you can accomplish these skills. You've demonstrated, for instance, you can climb a ladder and take a hose line in a window. You can search a room for an occupant. That's why I set it up that way. So I'd be curious to hear, again, I really feel I gave you a lot of materials, I know that. This is something I really want to kind of hand off and just answer questions if needed.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency that you've given us on that, but I like to go with some really simple answers that I know you can just give, questions that you know you can just give the answers off the bat, and you answered most of them that I was going to ask about. So right now we're just talking 7 firefighters that would benefit from this. And I agree. I think, what you've spelled out here, the number of calls, 50 a year, must maintain the residents in the borough so they're close. And I personally like the 1 and 2 that you mentioned. I wonder if the traffic incident management, are we doubling up efforts there? Are already paid police force able to help with those traffic management whenever there's a call such as that?
So that certification is an effort to be inclusive of fire police.
Got it. Okay.
So one of the issues that we've faced over the years, particularly with fire police, is that at certain times they will bring someone for the mayor to swear in, and then they're like, go ahead. And there have been times where it's been a little bit tighter, and that, hey, you have to go take these classes. And then there have been times where it's been quite a bit looser. That's a relatively newer certification in the state. They do offer it. I can tell you it's far less rigorous, really, than the others you're dealing with. But it does require demonstration of certain things. I mean, a lot of people see cones put out, and they just kind of say, oh, that's great. There are certain ways you're supposed to do it.
Sure.
Not just from a standpoint of giving drivers sufficient space to slow and alter lane changes, but actually how you deploy them can affect whether or not you're struck by a vehicle. So, like in TIMS, which I took just the other year, the one thing that never occurred to me was when you're like on an interstate and you're laying out cones, you lay them out in a straight line, like on the white line or in the shoulder area, and then you turn around, you face traffic, and you walk, you put it straight out and back, go up to the next one, straight out, you come straight back into the area, where a lot of people would carry the stack of 6 cones, put one down, keep walking in the lane, put another one down, keep walking in the lane. It minimizes the amount of time you're in the travel lane, and we've had people very nearly struck, unfortunately.
Do you find, in your experience with fire departments, do you find that folks that volunteer and take the training for traffic management police, for fire police, don't just do it for fire police, they also want to continue the other training and get up to 1 and 2 level?
So it's still relatively atypical, but not as uncommon as it once was to have people kind of delve into multiple disciplines. We have a few that I can think of that have. We have one gentleman I can think of distinctly who, when he came to the community, at that very time, we didn't have a lot of fire police. So he went and got trained to become a fire police officer. And then this is around the era when we were getting ready to turn the ambulance over to and create Adams Regionals a few years before that. And he's like, we don't have anybody to ride the ambulance. So he went and took EMT. And then eventually he went and did his firefighter training. There's more crossover than there once was, but in particular in our agency, there's not a lot. A lot of our people that control traffic do just that. We also do have people that's more common probably to be, say, a driver operator or a firefighter and then go into traffic control, and they do it because of their ability to fulfill the other roles.
And sorry for the questions.
You're good.
And our EMTs in the borough are from the Adams County, and they are professionally paid. They're not.
It's essentially a paid service now.
Okay, so we already
Yeah,
have.
if you were to ask Adams Regional, they will tell you that you can volunteer there.
Sure.
But from a practical approach,
Right.
It is a paid service, and most often now it's an advanced life support service. So you're getting a paramedic, which is a lot better than it was maybe 10 years ago.
So I'll say right now, I mean, if we're just talking 7 people, 7 firefighters, I think that is very reasonable. Like they're volunteering, they're putting their lives on the line and volunteering. I wonder, however, if maybe we go with considering doing this for 1 and 2 as an incentive for gaining more of the level 1 and 2 firefighters.
So when you say level 1, do you mean firefighter 1 and
so
driver operator?
So the 1 and 2 that is listed on the dock.
Oh, the bullet points.
I'm trying to find it again.
The first and second bullet points, I guess you mean.
Down, where did I just had it. So the NFPA 1001 standard for firefighter 1. So I'm looking that as one position, and then the driver operator is NFPA 1002.
Yeah, 1002. Yeah.
So I was looking at those 2 positions. Not that fire police are, I would want to be inclusive to all of them, but I'm wondering, is the fire police something that I don't know, is everybody going to start becoming a volunteer as a fire police to get a tax credit? Whereas are the fire police, not that they're not needed, they are needed, but are they driving the fire engine and are they running into burning homes?
Yeah, for a variety of reasons. When I went and discussed this with the fire department's board, and I discussed this with them last Thursday, they had some questions to ask. I would have proposed to grant this program candidly to only people that were certified firefighter 1s, as firefighter 1 under NFP 1001. That's what I would have done. And they said, well, what about people that drive? Now, it's very common for people that drive to be certified as firefighter 1. Even we have a member that's well over 60 who is certified as a firefighter 1 and drives. Because it generally doesn't go inside anymore. So I said, well, okay, and I looked up, and the testing standard for NFPA 1002 for driving has changed a bit in the past few years. There was a time when you had to be a firefighter 1 in order to test for driver, operator, pumper under NFPA 1002 in the state. You don't have to anymore, but it's still pretty rigorous. A lot of it deals with the inspection of the apparatus. You have to know where all the fluids and everything are, but then also, of course, the different operational things you have to do. They really wanted to try to include the fire police in some way, and this was the method NFPA 1091 was the way that I pursued. Related to your concerns there, it's difficult because they do provide a service. If they did not provide that service, it would put a significant burden on the police department. The other reality is that there are many times that I have driven the fire engine, parked the fire engine, carried 4 cones, half a block, and closed the street. And that's the difficulty, right? Would you have a catastrophic failure without them?
Right.
It depends upon the circumstances. Not in the same ways. There are days when they don't show up, when it's very problematic. Basically what happens is the fire apparatus gets stuck. That's pretty much the solution, because the state police are not generally staff to handle it. PennDOT is usually slow to respond. Some of your townships are just not able. They don't have road crews even. The boroughs, I would say, abnormally well prepared to deal with something where it's like, hey, this is going to close for hours. And that's been a problem for many, many years with how road closures occur with fire. It's supposed to be for fire police are supposed to be for an emergency closure. I think it's by MET's Municipal Uniform Traffic Control Device Standards, I think, but I could be wrong. It's by someone's standard. That's usually, they kind of put a timer, and it's up to 45 minutes. And after that, like, you can stay because it's the right thing to do, but the problem is you'll have times where people will be out for like 6, 8, 10 hours. And I think that's why the board was interested in pursuing it for them. The difficulty of that is there really is no great control for it, right? Could you have people that basically signed up to do that and go do it? And yeah, the 1091 standard, I use that because it requires a lot more of them. They have to take about 3 or 4 classes before they can test for that, and they do have to test. I'll be candid though, it's not anywhere close to the amount of time you invest to train for the other two things at all.
And that's the only reason why I bring up, like, if we want, I'm looking at it as an incentive to build the volunteer fire department up, meaning all of the positions, but specifically the position 1 and 2. If anybody's going to run into a fire to save a life, or to save the building, and hopefully save the building, and they're not being paid to do it, they should absolutely have that tax credit, in my opinion.
And so you said you structured it as a rebate, so if you qualify 1 year, but the next year you only did 49, do you not get the rebate?
So how it's framed up, and it's in the act, basically the individual the borough would have to generate a form. The individual will have to fill out that form. It may even have to be notarized, I'm not sure. That would go in, and then a list would be provided that the fire chief and 1 other officer would have to sign each year. So they would have to, they keep using the term certify, really, and it's not, basically they're certifying that these people meet your criteria that you as a taxing authority are eligible to set, which in this case we recommend includes a certification standard. I recommend includes a certification standard and a number of responses. And I kind of use that method because it kind of keeps it simple, right? Do you have the certification? Did you do what you're supposed to do? And candidly, the 50 threshold is kind of, it's almost borderline low. The concept was, well, do you go with 50? Do you go with 100? It's nice to use a round number.
How many have you done, Mr. Heyser? Like last year?
Never less than 100.
Okay.
Even with the kids and everything else.
Yeah. That's good to know.
But one of the things I considered when I drafted this also was that this may very well be kind of a blueprint that neighboring municipalities use.
Right.
So I wanted to be sensitive to the fact that, with the exception of, I guess, United now has 4 different stations. So depending how they're counting their responses, yeah, there might be more, say, than Gettysburg. But otherwise, most other agencies in the county might handle 200-300 calls a year. So if this were used, say, by Cumberland Township, which I think was brought up to me, well, what if they use the same criteria? I said, well, it's within their purview to do what they want. But say, like the Barlow Fire Company, 50 is probably a lot more appropriate. It may be very difficult. I know there are people that have 100 a year down there, but it's a lot more difficult because the pager just goes off less frequently. Probably more so than it did at one time because they have a tanker, but.
And if this were adopted, we wouldn't want to create an incentive to not live here. Like, I have to do 50 for Gettysburg, but only 40 for Barlow.
Well, it'd be in the township, so the town, like Cumberland Township, is split between the 2 companies. So yeah, you don't want to create certainly an incentive. I think the big issue here was our tax rate is just so different, right? So much higher than many others. And I'm looking around at a bunch of kids around, to me, most are between 20 and 30 years old and looking at buying their first house. And one of them literally said, "Was there anything you can do for me?" I said, "Well, candidly, actually, yeah, there is." So and we had a person that I know that, well, literally stated that as such as part of the reason. There were some ironies in that, but that was one of their stated reasons.
Well, I think what you've laid out here is a no-brainer. I think this is absolutely worth pursuing.
I think it's definitely worth the investment of supporting and retaining our volunteer firefighters.
Absolutely.
Can you the bigger picture? Can you speak a little bit about the danger of, just in general, Pennsylvania with the volunteer firefighting forces, and I mean how it was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago?
As much as I love our municipal government structure, and I really do, because it makes you so really responsible to the people. It makes you so accessible to the people. You're in a town of about 5,000 people, and it's like, all right, like they see you on the street, they tell you what they think. Whereas you get into larger forms of government, that's not always the case, county government per se. One of the functions of that is that each municipality, about 10 or 15 years ago, became responsible by borough code or township code for ensuring that this is happening. But it's not excessively common for municipal governments outside of cities, first, second, 2A, or third class, to actually have a fire department of their own. You will see in some places, I know this occurred in Columbia Borough, it has occurred in many townships where the township will essentially take authority over the existing organizations, and they'll say, hey, you still own your equipment, you still own your building, that's all fine and well, but you will operate under the purview of the township. And sometimes that involves hiring an employee, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it can involve hiring an employee that's very much part-time. Waynesboro has a paid fire chief, but I don't know what their salary is. I know at one time it was like $5,000 or $6,000 for the year. So this is not a full-time position. And then it gives them some extra authority over how they operate. The number of companies overall in the state is probably way too many. We've seen a lot of consolidation in the area. But the problem is consolidation only really helps when it addresses either a personnel staffing issue or a monetary issue. And a lot of times they don't address either. So from a personnel standpoint, yeah, it's like dramatic. I mean, I think Pennsylvania Burning was, publisher, American Burning's published in the 70s. When my grandfather joined the fire department, 2 members that evening had to go on the retirement list, like the inactive list, because they capped it at 125. You weren't allowed to have more than that. I think that was 1954. My father's era, they dropped you used to have to be 21. Right around the time he joined was when they dropped it to 18. You were allowed to join at 18. During my 20 years, it's been, candidly though, relatively steady. Not great in that regard, but relatively steady over those years. Some of it is the expectations have changed. If you go back in the 1970s and 80s, once you're voted into the fire department, here's some equipment and have a good day. Some of that's because of training changes. It's not, there aren't mandates. There are no mandates in Pennsylvania at all. But just, the results of various lawsuits, fatalities, things that have occurred where they made some changes in that way. And the equipment that we use has changed a lot. There was like when I joined, it was completely permissible and expected to use equipment like protective equipment that was maybe 20 years old, perhaps even 30 years old, and that was like the norm. And I can remember in college, so I grew up here, so about the time I turned 18 or 19, they bought me new turnout gear. So I had like new equipment. But I can remember a guy a year older than me in college, I remember distinctly him getting burned up on his shoulder because the stuff he was wearing was from the 80s. And this is like 2004, 2005. Today, we have very modern, up-to-date equipment in that respect. I remember estimating it at $2,000 a set, and a few months ago, somebody corrected me, and they're like, it's more like $3,500, $4 grand. And I was like, oh. So all those expenses kind of contribute to it. So even when you get somebody that joins, you think about it a little bit. Are you going to go take a class, right? We're not just going to go buy equipment. That becomes an issue. But the numbers are dramatically down. For many years, I was the youngest person outside of college students, probably for at least a decade. And that was like concerning, right? There's nobody that's going to be here. Like, these folks are here for a few years, that's great, but nobody's going to stay for the duration.
I think we can all agree that we want a safe community, and any opportunity that the local government can provide incentives for firefighters and police force to live within the borough, the safer community we will be.
Yep, I agree with that.
Wes?
Ms. Lawson, comments, questions? Patty?
Nope, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay. Mayor Freeland, I'm sorry, you wanted to...
What did you say about the mayor swearing in people that haven't been trained? Did I hear that right?
It has happened in the past.
How would we prevent that in the future and going forward?
You need to have the conversation basically with the fire police leadership and the fire department. One of the interesting things about the fire police is sometimes they, and this is true in some places because they're sworn by township supervisor or mayor, and sometimes they do exist as an NC unto themselves. Sometimes they kind of feel that they do. They do not. But I don't know if it's happened in your tenure. But I know that it has happened in the past, and it's kind of like, oh. And candidly, that's not necessarily limited to fire police, and that's kind of why I used some of the standards I did. I can remember very distinctly, it was like right after my birthday, and I turned 18, and like, oh, and it was right when Pings burnt. And I can remember people going into that building that were no more trained than I was to go in that building. That's not that many years ago. So we've come a long way. But yeah, it's something good. So if everybody's all right, we'll put a, this will be a motion to authorize the solicitor to draft using the criteria we have here.
Yeah.
This will take several months to work through. Okay, the other item on the agenda is more for informational purposes this evening. I apologize, I had some difficulty getting through it, but I did eventually. The sign ordinance. Yes, the sign ordinance. All right. So just for the public's knowledge, essentially, this would be a revisit or a resumption of a process we were working on in 2017. One of the major drivers here is to ensure that the borough is compliant with a court ruling from 2015 called Ree v. Gilbert, which dealt with a church that did not have a fixed building and placed out signs to direct people to its services, and the town of Gilbert was using criteria that involved the content of the signs, and that was not permitted under the First Amendment. So it gets a little complex, but we need to make sure we're in compliance with that. And then at the time, we had some requests from people in the community. Candidly, most of them are not in their positions in the community anymore. The library director at the time wanted to hang more banners. Chris Gladford at the Arts Council wanted to have a marquee. The seminary's president, the Unified Seminary's president, wanted to put up on Seminary Ridge digital signage, which I found a really interesting request, given the historic nature of that area of Seminary Ridge. But there were things of that nature, and then Mr. Carr had received an email that was more recent relating to essentially painting on a building, and this is one of the issues we looked at the time as well. You know, how are murals treated? What is a mural a sign? Can you paint on the building or not? And that does have some intersections with not only the sign ordinance, but also with the historic district ordinance. So like if you're dealing with a building which is traditionally painted, like a masonry building that's painted, it's a little simpler. If you're dealing with a masonry building that would not be painted, there's a whole another set of can of worms with the hard regulations.
And I think as far, sorry to interrupt.
No, go for it.
I think
Good.
as far as murals and signage in general, there's a lot of historic towns in Pennsylvania that had indeed painted advertising or painted artwork on brick. I'm thinking of Lancaster specifically. Even downtown York has some. And when a building is already painted, you know, if the brick has already been painted, then we're not, you know, that's one thing. It's already been painted. So we're, you know, perhaps the owner might want to paint something on it. But, you know, it would be interesting to look at, clearly there's historic pictures of downtown Gettysburg, and our buildings are definitely different than some of the buildings in, say, downtown York or downtown Lancaster. So our buildings in Gettysburg, clearly, maybe we didn't have painted advertising like Lancaster did. But those things are historic, and they're still there. The business that's being advertised isn't. The business that's in the building isn't the business. It's just historical because something that was in there was that type of painting, and they left it there because it adds to the historical visuals of what that downtown district was at one time. You know, we do have a couple of murals here in the borough that I can recall, specifically one right across the street from Federal Point that, you know, I guess is up against the Dollar General store. There's that. There's one over by the fire hall, Culp.
So what about the orphans' home or the soldiers?
So there are some things, but I guess, you know, it would be interesting to continue to look into. Our sign ordinance has been, over the last several years, I'm sure it's been quite a discussion. But there are some things about it that I think definitely need to be looked into on how we maintain a historic look architectural-wise, but there are some beautiful things that could happen facade-wise, visually, that I think would enhance many of our small businesses. And again, I'm not in favor of if a building hasn't already been painted.
Right.
But if it's already been painted, what historical value are we saving? It's already been painted. So, you know, I think there's some things to be looked into as we go into the future of what type of Gettysburg are we going to become. And I think, you know, I've said this before, our historical architecture is beautiful and it will not change, but there's visuals that could change and still have the architectural beauty. The battlefield is not going anywhere. It's always going to be here. But there is so much more to the borough than the battlefield, and so much more to the borough than our historic buildings. And we need to elevate that, specifically our very unique small businesses. And if they're going to thrive, we need to help them thrive so that we don't become a ghost town.
So I think there's a lot of.
Mr. Heyser, oh.
No, go ahead,
excuse me.
Patty. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yep, so as we look at the sign ordinance, I think we need to look at it comprehensively so that it's not just the aesthetics of the historic downtown, but also just from a practical and common sense standpoint, how signage is used for directional signage. That's really important. I know that we've mentioned this before, but, you know, better signage to direct visitors to the parking garage and things like this. So it needs to be looked at comprehensively beyond just the aesthetics.
Yeah, and a lot of these items that are listed in the PBS, the questions are highlighted in colors. They are items that were raised at the time, and then basically I developed questions to go with them so that we could move through it in a reasonable pace. If there are other items that people would like to raise, we can certainly add to that list of topics. But a lot of them do really touch across the broad breadth of the sign ordinance itself, dealing with things like banners and off-premises advertising, which was a thing at the time that was intended to essentially be changed because of the beginning of more alley-based businesses, so that you could have, and again, this is a regulation, so you still have to come to an agreement with that property owner at the end of the alley to have a sign. But yeah, I think that the borough, we've talked about some things we could do as a borough to increase some of the wayfinding signage in addition to the regulations, which really are what this mostly addresses. So what I'd ask the members to do is spend the next month or so, look through the questions. It's going to be kind of important that you form an opinion. I can tell you this from the last round. It becomes necessary because the issue of murals, essentially the last time there was a question about, is a mural a sign? And in the ordinance, currently it is, and it was a 3-3 split, and we had someone absent, and they couldn't really come to a conclusion. So that's how we ended. So usually if something is in the law and we can't reach a conclusion, we kind of leave it. But there are other things when we talk about murals as signs, and this is probably one of the issues that came up, was there are square footage limits. And when you're reading the comments, one of the most telling sets of comments I thought was, and one of the most interesting sets was from Paul Witt, because as a franchisee, he was very happy with square footage limits and internal lighting exclusions because he could look at Best Western and say, hey, I can't do what you want me to do. I'll do this instead, and they had to. Because they would have mandated perhaps that he have an internally lit sign and many square feet of signage that he didn't really want. I thought that was probably one of the most interesting things I found out in that process.
In all the ordinances that I've watched being crafted over the years, this was the most combative, the most argumentative.
The time before.
Yes.
Yeah, I was happy not to be here for that. Yeah.
Yes.
As a council
People
person.
got really riled up about this. There were at least 2 lawsuits, Harry, against
Yeah.
the council. One of them of someone wanting more input in what the final
Right.
version would be. And it cost tens of thousands of dollars to combat these legal efforts. But over and over, through the version that was so combative, people kept saying, we don't want to turn Gettysburg into a boardwalk. That was a concern, that the signage cheapened the character of historic Gettysburg. So just some interesting theory. You would think signs would be easy.
Yeah.
But it wasn't.
When you walk, and it definitely needs a lot of research and some crafting here on the specific verbiage on what is, and there's a lot of work already done, so we have that for us. But there's some beauty about walking downtown and seeing the architecture, and you walk and you see all of the building, most of them, connected with different roof lines. That in itself makes it an incredible architecture, quaint town. What sign supporting said small business on the front of the first floor is, in my opinion, completely different. Now, I will say right now, I agree, I am against neon signs. I'm not talking about that. And also I'm not even talking, sometimes I'm not even, it's not even about the advertising signage. There are other things that can be done that is more decorative, that can be a spin on what that business is. And when you see it, it's like, oh, that's a dress shop. I know right away because there's a dress. It's not a name of a business, but it's a dress. But we have it in our ordinance that a percentage of the per use for advertising the sign, the business, a percentage of the building, a square footage of the building, a percentage of the square foot of the building, I had to get that out, could be used for advertising sign purposes. And one of those possibilities is printing something and attaching it to the brick, which only destroys the building. If the building was already painted, why won't we just let them paint their advertising sign on the building, wherein paint is not going to hurt an already painted building, brick building, as much as attaching something to the mortar. Do you follow me on that?
Oh, no, I do, and I think it'll be a good discussion we'll have here in August. I'm reminded of one of the things that was said at that time that I just, as a history teacher, it was kind of hard to, and somebody really, like, I know Chris went, where did you go recently? Up to
Fort Stanwix.
Fort Stanwix. So, like,
Yeah.
you know, we're the types of folks, with what we do, we often, like, seek out historic places. It's a thing. Weird correlation there. But I remember at the time, it was the Reed Cider House wanted to paint basically like a large apple or something like that towards the rear of the building. And we had someone that stated that that created a false sense of history because it wouldn't have been a cider house in 18, you know, whatever. I was like, for me, even that was quite a reach. I'm like, this is, I hear what you're saying,
Right.
but there's no, I mean, our historic district ordinance is a good example of this. There's no frozen moment of time. People perceive it to be July 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 1863, but it's not. It's maintaining the historic architecture
Sure.
over the span. So I certainly hear what you're saying, and I think that'll be an interesting conversation among others, because there was an era when Gettysburg did look, before my time, I know that it looked quite maybe amusement park like in a certain era. So yeah, I would agree that I think most people probably don't want to revisit that. All right, so we'll be ready for August with the sign ordinance. Any other comments from council or staff before we go to public comment?
Parking. I have to ask because people keep asking me. Back to the pay by phone. Is it true that there's only two options on the pay by phone, 1 hour or 2 hour?
No,
Because they showed it to me on their app, and that's the only two options that were available.
no. If you look at it, those are quick options that you can pick.
Uh-huh.
You can select the hours, or even if you pick the hotel zone, you can select days. Those are just quick options.
Okay. Can we take a look at the downtown district 20130? I was told, you mentioned at the last meeting that the pay by phone was more customer friendly. Is that us as the borough or the actual user?
Both.
Okay. I'm getting lots of pushback on this from residents. If we can look at that, because they showed it to me on their app, and it literally only had those two options, 1 hour or 2 hour.
I can show it to you then.
Thank you.
They
So
are-
I can help them
It's all
as
there.
people
Mhm.
start coming up to me, like
Yeah.
yelling at me with their phone. Thank you.
I do.
Yes, Ms.
A
Butterfield.
couple of quick things.
District, by the way,
Yeah.
in case you're wondering. And quite a beautiful home.
And the other thing I just want to mention, this afternoon,